Linda has prepared a terrific packet. I can't imagine there's anybody who's figured out how to watch this live and doesn't know how to get the packet, but on the off chance, go to our council website, click on committee meetings. You can download the PDF document, which has not only the staff memorandum, but a number of presentations that we'll be going through. And we're joined today by the Department of Housing and Community Affairs, by Maryland Legal Aid, a number of our nonprofit partners, including the Housing Initiative Partnership, the Renters Alliance, CASA, LEDC, and we're going to get a number of presentations from both DHCA and our partners, and follow up on some of the issues that we've been working on all along. The council has, as we'll hear more about, appropriated a significant amount of money to rental relief, over $20 million. And we're going to hear about how the implementation of that is going, and how it kind of all blends with other federal and state supports. So there certainly is a lot to discuss. We're joined by Councilmember Hucker, Councilmember Glass. Glad to have you here. And good morning.
Thank you.
So I don't know if anyone wants to say anything before we get started. Certainly, floor is open for that. Otherwise, we'll turn it to Linda. All right, Linda.
Morning. You're going to have presentations this morning, so I won't spend a lot of time queuing them up. The first you'll have is from Director Nagam about the an overview of rental assistance and some of the work that's been going on. That'll be followed by comments from Mr. Vitale from Legal Aid, followed by another presentation from Alana Brenda of DHHS, and then the partners are here for community discussion. I think we are all aware that while there are some significant protections in place right now through the moratoriums, both through the governor's order and the CDC, the courts are indeed back open. The rent is still due. These are all just moratoriums on evictions. They're not a forgiveness of rent. So whenever these are lifted, the rent will be due. And then in addition, there are some concerns because while the moratorium apply to failure to pay rent, there are other reasons that landlords can go, such as a tenant holding over. And these are also of concerns to people that evictions could occur for other reasons that might affect a fairly large number of tenants. So the goal for today is for you all to have a really good update on where we are with our programs and what the partners are observing. The last time that we met, we did have a lot of discussion about the need for tenants to have access to legal aid, particularly because defense will be that you can show that you've been impacted by COVID and had a loss of income. And so people will need assistance with that, as well as navigating if they have other reasons. And also there'll be need from our partners to help people with negotiations with landlords over payment plans. So there's a lot in front of you today. The committee had asked to do this quite soon when you returned from summer recess. We had done a Section G amendment to authorize some contracts right before the council went on recess, which the council was in agreement with, but asked that the PHED committee come back and have an update. And so that's why this has been scheduled for today. And so with that, if there aren't other comments, I would turn it over to Director Nagam.
Great. Certainly got a lot to get through with. Good morning, Director Nagam.
Good morning. Hope everyone had a good weekend. Before I go into my presentation, we have about a dozen slides from DHCA. I would like to mention this to tenants who are watching us today, that we understand what you're going through, all the hardships, the crisis during this pandemic situation, and all the challenges that you were facing pre-pandemic, and those challenges were basically, were increased by many folds during this pandemic situation. That being said, we would like you to know that we are here to help you. our offices may not be open to visitors, but you can reach us via email or via phone call. We do have several resources available, although our financial resources may be limited, but we are doing the best we can in reaching out to as many tenants as possible. The administration recommended and the council approved more than $20 million in rental assistance from different parts of money, which you will see from our presentation. The council also took the legislative action in terms of limiting the rent increases to 2.6% during this emergency period. And both the county executive and the council have sent letters of support to the governor and to Maryland DSCD asking for more rental assistance, especially for Montgomery County. So we are here to help you. You don't have to be fearful for anything. Irrespective of your immigration status in the country, please reach out to us. We'll do whatever we can to assist you, to put you in touch with the service organizations who can really assist you and also assist you monetarily. We have some very good landlords and tenants alike in the county, and we have heard through AOBA that the landlords are ready to help our tenants. So while DSC and HHS are doing their effort in meeting with the tenants and the landlords and putting them in touch, we would like the tenants and landlords to start talking to each other. As Linda mentioned, the rent is not forgiven, it is due. This is simply a temporary moratorium on evictions. So before it's too late, please reach out to us. With that, I'm going to start sharing my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. Let me go to slide number 2.
It would be better if you could make it full screen. I don't know if you can on your.
Let me see.
Under view, probably.
Let me see if I can do it. It won't let me. Let me see.
Slideshow.
Okay, can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. I'm on slide number 2. So we have 130,000 rental units in the county. And based on the survey that we conducted in the month of June for large multifamily properties, and then again for small multifamily properties in July, the delinquency rate that we found through those surveys was around 15%. So if you take 15% of 130,000 rental units, it's 20,000, households who may be delinquent at this point. It's simply an estimate. We are trying to revise these numbers as we learn more from the surveys. We are having an eye on what the delinquency rate is. So pre-COVID, our delinquency rate was around 5%. And then post-COVID, it jumped to 15%. So that's a 300% increase in the delinquency rate from pre-COVID levels. So if you take 20,000 households and consider a median rent of $1,750 in the county, that amounts to $35 million in terms of delinquency on a monthly basis. It's a big number. We know that. And if you look at the employment, in the county, there were 566,000 households based on February data who were employed. So the unemployment rate increased from 2.8% in February to a peak of 9%, and it has come down slightly to 7.4% in July. So in terms of May unemployment numbers, there were 48,000 or close to 49,000 individuals who didn't have employment. Then in July, it came down to almost to 43,000 households.
Now, Director Nagam, just to clarify, on the estimated monthly delinquency, that is calculating, assuming that all of the rent is delinquent, the $35 million month number. We don't know how much delinquency there is of the delinquency. Is it full delinquency or is it partial delinquency?
Well, the data that we received from the property management companies was based on their entire portfolio, so it varied. So we are trying to get better data over here, but this is just a ballpark number, assuming there were no partial payments.
Okay.
Okay, the next slide. So as a part of the response, and then we entered into the recovery group. Within the housing mission, there were 3 recovery groups: eviction and homeless prevention, multifamily property distress, and common ownership communities. Here, today, we are talking about eviction and homeless prevention and multifamily property distress. So those are the 2 work groups which work very closely on tenant issues. At this point, all of our recovery groups have made their recommendations. They're in standby mode at this point. And those groups were comprised of landlords, legal services, reps from tenant support services, homeless support, county agencies. So their recommendation varied from delinquency survey to rental assistance, more rental assistance, reaching out to tenants and landlords, then to policy positions in terms of any changes that we may want to see from the General Assembly. Then, as I mentioned earlier, both the council and the executive, as executive recommendation, the council committed certain funds for rental assistance program, which we'll go through that in the next slide. Then we have launched tenant and landlord, information campaign to reach out to them, to let the landlords know and the tenants know what the tenants' rights are, what the responsibilities are of each party. We expanded the tenant education legal aid services. As Linda mentioned earlier, under FY20, we had certain, organizations who were funded. Then we provided additional money through the CARES Act. That money needs to be spent by December 30th. And then from DSCA's point of view, where DSCA has made loans, we allowed our developers to defer the cash flow payments through December 2020. And as I mentioned earlier, the council took the legislative action and they put a cap on the rent increases to 2.6%, and both the county executive and the council recommended changes to the governor's executive order. So in terms of the rental assistance program, in short, the council had COVID rent relief phase 1, which was comprised of $2 million of CARES Act money and $1.5 million from County Rental Assistance Fund. This program was implemented in May with a target to serve 1,000 households, up to $4,000 in rent arrearage on a household basis from HHS. HHS administers this program. Then the second program, which is a larger program, is $20 million out of the CARES Act money, is also administered by HHS. These funds were approved by the council in July, and the program was implemented in September. And Ilana from HHS is going to go through her presentation in terms of the implementation of this program. We target to serve 5,000 households with an assistance of up to $4,000 in providing rent arrearage assistance. And these funds, these $20 million, must be spent by December 30th of this year. And then the county did receive close to 2.8 or 2.9 million of CDBG COVID rental assistance from HUD, of which we put aside $1.095 million for rental assistance program and about $1 million for small business assistance program. Both of these programs are ongoing and running. We did face some hurdles in the CDBG rental assistance program. We spoke to HUD, and it wasn't just the Montgomery County. We spoke to Alexandria, Prince George's County. They were experiencing the same issues, those challenges which were mandated by HUD. Since that time, HUD has given us more flexibility. So we have basically reincarnated this entire program. We have made the application process simpler than what it was. We have increased the amount of assistance from $500 to $600. Still is limited to 3 months. That's the maximum number of months assistance we can provide under the CARES Act. And then with HOC's assistance who are implementing this program, we hope that we can serve at least 950 households out of this part of money. the application process has closed. HOC received about 1,400 applications. So hopefully going forward, they're going to start working on those applications, start dispersing the money.
Dr. Ngam, I think we'll come back to this, but can you just describe the timeline you envision for the disbursement of the county's $20 million fund?
Yeah, our timeline would be, as I mentioned, these monies have to be spent by December 30th. So we hope that through DSCA, our partners outreach and HHS outreach, we can reach out to about 5,000 households by December 30th by providing $4,000 in assistance per household.
And you presently have how many that have applied?
I will let Ilana give us those revised numbers, but the last I heard was they had received application from 1,000 tenants so far. So, but we'll get those revised numbers in their presentation.
Okay.
Now, in terms of the landlord and tenant outreach, we have 30,000 licenses in our database. We reached out to all of those landlords. We have told them what the emergency requirements are. We have had multiple webinars with a couple of service organizations. We continue to have those webinars going forward. We have updated the information on DSCA's website, and our plan is to hold a weekly webinar going forward, including DSCA doing their own webinars themselves in support with our service organization. So each week, tenant can expect a webinar so where they can come and both the landlords and tenant can ask their questions and get the most updated information. In terms of the tenant outreach, we have made several efforts to reach out to hard to reach and at-risk communities through social media flyers, through service organizations, through African American groups, Latino groups, Korean groups, through the chambers of commerce, through regional service centers, through ads on ride-on buses, both in English and in Spanish. We have passed around flyers through food distribution centers, through COVID-19 testing, and any other outreach that our RSC's directors were doing in their districts. We asked our landlords to post tenant-sized poster in all of the common areas, showing court suspension of eviction actions, governor's order protecting tenants, rent increases limit to 2.6%, and we continue to update DSCA's website for any changes that we are seeing in the marketplace. Now, I mentioned earlier that we are doing multiple webinars. We have had multiple webinars, including at least one in Spanish, and we'll continue to do those webinars going forward for the foreseeable future. We're also putting together a package for both the landlords and the tenants on the payment plans. Some like generic information, how to negotiate, what should be in that payment plan package. That being said, we sincerely ask both our landlords and the tenants to start talking to each other because the rent is due, it's not forgiven, and whatever rent the tenant can pay, please go ahead and pay that rent. Now, in terms of the tenant support services, in terms of dollar figures from our FY20 budget, we are providing support of $218,000 to Renters Alliance, LEDC, Housing Initiative Partnership, and then also to London Legal Aid. And then when we talked to the council and the committee a couple of months ago, at the committee's suggestion and the council's session as well, we increased certain amounts for tenant education and counseling, and also for legal aid. So with the council approval, we amended those contracts and provided $220,000 in additional money from CARES Act, which needs to be spent by December 30th of this year, to LEDC, HIP for one-on-one counseling and understanding, what the rent payment options are for the tenant. And
Okay.
also, Maryland Legal Aid is getting additional assistance. Yes.
Thank you. I just want to thank you for all of this funding and working with all of our nonprofit partners. About a year and a half ago, maybe more, I met with LEDC, and they informed me that they provide tenant counseling services, which I had not known, as much as I've worked with them for many, many years, and they had no contract with the county to provide those services in the county. So I think it's terrific to have them as part of our team, and I'm really glad to see this this disbursement. So thank you. Please
Sure.
continue.
Thank you. Okay, next slide. Now, this is where the rubber meets the road, and this is just simply estimates. In the first slide, we mentioned that we estimate that about 20,000 households may be delinquent. We don't know how much of a rent payment they have made, but they may be delinquent. And given the programs we just mentioned in the previous slides, we anticipate to serve 7,000 households out of these 20,000 households. So there is a gap to serve additional 13,000 households. So assuming we follow the model that HHS follows of providing $4,000 in assistance for rent arrearages, we estimate a need for $52 million additional need besides what we just mentioned, what we already have committed to serve additional 13,000 households. We know this is a big number, but we just wanted to, and it's an estimate. We're going to refine this estimate as we get additional information, but we want to put this number out so that the need is there. Besides this $20 million, $3.5 million, or $1.9 million from CDBG rental assistance program through HOC. So there is a considerable amount of need in terms of rental assistance. Now we continue to look for additional sources of money. We recently learned from HUD that Montgomery County, as an entitlement community, will be receiving additional $4.2 million in CDBG rental assistance program. And unlike the previous CDBG rental assistance, in this assistance, we understand that we can provide assistance up to 6 months. We are trying to see what other criteria they have at this point and what other uses could there be besides providing rental assistance. So in the next few weeks, we'll be coming back to the council so that these monies could be appropriated as well. And then the state recently, about a week and a half ago, announced a grant application for $15.1 million. Those applications are due on October 2nd, and we anticipate that the final decisions will be made by the state by the end of October. It's going to be a competitive process. Montgomery County DHCA is preparing the application in consultation with some of our nonprofits based on the survey data that we got. And I understand that we'll be doing a public hearing at the council next Tuesday. So we are working on the application as we speak. We are working with the council staff on the resolution and the hearing matter for next week. And we'll announce our application so the public can see it as well, and also we'll put the notice in the newspaper shortly. So that's another avenue. We do not know how much money Montgomery County will get. We'll try to get as much money as possible. As we described, the need is at least $52 million based on the numbers that we have seen. Of course, these are simply estimates, and we have to see how much money we get from the state. Then the state also announced assistance for $10 million for those properties where the state has made loans. So some of our nonprofits have used this program to get some background for certain properties. We have reached out to the state to see if the state would be willing to open up their program to other properties where the state may not have made a loan, but the county or other local jurisdictions may have made a loan or provide some kind of other assistance. So we understand that there are about $4 million left from this $10 million. And we also understand that state has opened up another round to reach out to other property owners across the state so that they can use this money. But we are doing whatever we can in asking the state to expand this program. So should the state expand this program, it's possible that some of our developers in the county may be able to get assistance for those properties where the state has not made any loans, but the county may have provided assistance. So we continue to look for other resources, whether it's the state level or federal level, where we can find additional resources for our landlords and also for the tenants. Because if the tenants are able to pay their rent to the landlords, then the landlords get help too.
Okay, great.
Okay. In terms of legal assistance, I know this is something on everyone's mind, and Frank Whitehall will elaborate on this aspect as well. But to let the tenants and the landlords know, we have Office of Landlord Tenant Affairs within DHCA. They can, reach out to our offices. They're always helpful to answer any questions and telling our landlords and the tenants alike what the legal rights are, what their responsibilities are. They help out with the mediation. They investigate complaints as well. Now, in terms of the service request numbers, we have seen that the number has not increased. It has stayed around 820 service requests per month. But the issues have changed, of course, given this pandemic situation. There are concerns about eviction actions, rights, processes, and especially now the courts have reopened, what to expect in the court. So those kind of issues have increased now. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we have all the affairs offices and also service organizations to provide tenant education and to our landlords and the tenants. And the county has contracted with Maryland Legal Aid to provide free legal representation for the tenants in the district court from FY20 funds and also under the CARES Act money, as I mentioned in the previous slide. And then tenants may also receive legal information from the court self-help center or by calling Montgomery County Pro Bono program. So those are two avenues as well for our tenants to seek legal assistance. And I'm sure Frank Whitehall can give us more information when he talks about this aspect of the slide.
As Frank is going to talk more about the legal issues? Okay.
Yes, that's my understanding.
Okay.
Now, in terms of the governor's order, as as was mentioned earlier, governor's order simply temporarily prohibits evictions for failure to pay rent. So the rent is not forgiven. The rent is still due. So we are asking our landlords to get in touch with their landlords and pay whatever they can at this point. We know that our tenants are facing hardship, but whatever they can pay, it will help them. If they do have to end up going to the court, they can demonstrate to the judge that they did whatever they could in terms of mitigating these circumstances. Because the court will issue a reserved judgment, and I'm sure Frank Whitehall will elaborate on this later on. Even if the court accepts that the failure to pay rent was based on the substantial loss of income due to COVID-19 issues. And this order remains in effect until the state of emergency is terminated and the public health emergency executive order is rescinded.
Okay. I think we have some questions about this, so we'll wait for Frank, I guess, to talk about this issue more generally.
Sure. Now, as you may have heard, CDC came out with their own executive order, which came into effect on September 1st, which will last until December 31st. Under this order, the tenant must present to the landlord a declaration under penalty of perjury that the renter meets these following qualifications. These are simply the facts we pulled out from the executive order. It remains to be tested in the courts. These kind of cases are going to the court now. We don't have an example right now, but basically based on that order and the declaration that the tenant provides to the landlord, this is what the tenant is telling the landlord, that they made best efforts to obtain government rental assistance. and their income in 2020 was no more than $19,000 on individual basis. And if they filed their tax return jointly, that wasn't more than $198,000. And then they experienced substantial loss of household income because of layoff or reduced work hours or extraordinary out-of-pocket medical expenses. And then the tenant has made best of efforts to make partial rent payments as close to the full amounts as possible. And this eviction would cause them to become homeless or require moving in with a friend or family members, basically doubling up. So which will increase the transmission of the virus, or the possibility of increasing the transmission of the virus. So these are the things which the tenant will have to put in a declaration when they send it to their landlord. And this is something which I'm sure Frank Vital will mention later on. Tenants are maybe showing this kind of declaration in the court as well. Now, for the next two slides, Rosie is going to present these two slides, and after Rosie's presentation is over, then Frank Vital will make his comments on the eviction process. And then after that, Ilana will go over her slides from HHS point of view. So Rosie, it's all yours.
Hello. All right. I'm going to be quick because I know this is a lot of information. Basically, all I'm saying, I'm going to review the eviction process. As you know, the landlord has to file an action in the district court. District court is open now, and they're accepting all cases, breach of lease, tenant holding over, and failure to pay rent. And because of the governor's order and the CDC order, you can go to court, you can present your defense. If the tenant doesn't appear, they'll probably get a judgment against them. And if the landlord doesn't appear, it's generally dismissed. And what happens in failure to pay rents is the order is put on hold because nobody can be evicted right now. So the order will be put on hold until the expiration of either the governor's order and or the CDC order, at which point it becomes effective. And that's when your appeal period kicks in. So on January 1st, if they stayed your order for eviction because you filed your declaration, on January 1st, you have your appeal period of 4 days. And if you don't pay up by then, your landlord can then file his warrant of restitution, which goes to the sheriff and kicks in the eviction. And that's the thing that goes to the warrant of restitution goes to the sheriff. And once the sheriff gets it and sends it out to all the parties, the landlord calls and schedules a date and time for the eviction with the sheriff. And you have up until the time the sheriff shows up at the door to pay. And the sheriff has to be present for the eviction. But we need to emphasize that the rent's not going away, and you can get evicted eventually for that money. So it's imperative that they work with landlord tenant and with the partners to set up payment arrangements for this rent and to get help from the county to the extent it's available if needed. What's the next one? And the courts, like I said, have already opened, and right now it's limited to 144 cases on Wednesdays, and unrepresented landlords go to hearing on Friday. And those are the numbers from 2014 to 2017. And I don't have the updated numbers, but Frank Vital may have.
Those are hearings just on this issue, or those are all the docket?
That's docket. On all the docket. The 144 cases are failure to pay rent.
Okay, FTPR. Failure to pay rent.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Next to Frank Vital from Maryland Legal Aid is going to make his comments. Frank.
Hi everyone. So I don't have any slides, and I'm going to go over some of what's already been discussed, but I wanted to give everybody here an idea of what's actually happening in court right now. So I think Rosie alluded to this. There's currently 3 days in district court where they're hearing landlord-tenant cases. Monday is every case except for failure to pay rents, whether or not the landlord is represented. Wednesday is only failure to pay rent and only cases where the landlord is represented, and Friday is only failure to pay rents, only cases where the landlord is unrepresented. So right now, with the funds that have been provided and as part of a sort of an extension of a program we were doing at the beginning of the year, are providing day of representation in court. At the beginning of the year, we were focusing on non-failure to pay rent cases because that's where our assistants, and this is our volunteer attorneys, could be the most effective. Now we are focusing on Wednesdays, Wednesdays being the landlord-represented failure to pay rent cases. I myself and our staff are still going in on Mondays. I have to hop off this call as soon as I'm done so I can continue prepping the docket for it. However, it's just us right now. The volunteers are coming in on Wednesdays. So to give you an idea of what we're looking at, the Monday cases have been about 10 to 12 a week, going on since I think late June is when we started going in on these cases, maybe early July. The number is slightly creeping up. It started off as like 5 or 6, and then 10 or 8, and now we're up to about 12. I think we've got 13 or 14 today. It looks like 13. So those cases are really not that different from what they were before. Attendance is low. That's unusually common. It's unfortunately common even in non-COVID times for tenants to not show up. We try to do our best to encourage, but there's obviously only so much we can do without crossing the line into solicitation or something like it. So we go in, we have the docket, we talk to clients when we get there, we ascertain eligibility. If they're eligible for services, we give them assistance that day. That's Monday. Wednesday is the big one. So as Rosie and the director said, we've got 144 cases scheduled. That is, there are 2 courtrooms. Each courtroom has 6 dockets per day. Each docket is 1 hour long, and each docket has 12 cases, so 144 cases. Out of those 144 cases, so far, it has been very slow. So the way that this program works is I'm there sort of overseeing and assigning cases. I'll take them if I need to, and I'm watching 2 courtrooms at the same time. So I'm running into one, talking to the judge and the clerk, see how many they've got, and I'll run into the other one and do the same thing. So I don't see everything that goes on, but this is my best estimation based on what I have seen. I believe that there were probably 4 or 5 either judgments or suspended judgments in the first week, 6 to 8 in the second week, and 0 judgments this past week. The reason for that is because these cases are March cases. So the rent is due from February and March. The tenants, they've paid $200 here, $500 here when they can. That rent has been paid. That February rent has been paid. So the vast, vast, vast majority of these cases are being dismissed, either ahead of time, which is what I certainly prefer landlords' attorneys to do, so I know ahead of time that I don't have to sit around the courthouse for an hour and a half, or they'll go there and they will dismiss them en masse. This has been the case for the last 3 weeks. I do expect it will be the case this week. I do not know when that is going to change, but I know it is going to change. These dismissals don't mean that these tenants don't owe money. It doesn't mean that they don't owe rent. It means that they don't owe rent for February because the rent is paid to the furthest back amount owed. I've had sort of off-the-record conversations with a couple of the landlords' attorneys that we have decent working relationships with, and they are as at a loss on the timeline on this as we are, and I believe the court is as well. We're all struggling to get through it, but these are coming. We just don't know when. I can't speak to whether or not these cases are going to increase slowly over time, or if we're going to come in on Wednesday and there's going to be a lot of people there. You know, it's going to be a cliff or a hill. As of right now, I'm still going to be there every Wednesday with staff if possible, and I'm going to have at least 1 volunteer there, but I am rescheduling. We plan to have 3 volunteers at all times. So I'm rescheduling my volunteers out through October, and once I get some word from the court on what they expect to see in November, I'll start scheduling for November as well. I plan to be there every Wednesday for as far out as I could see, either myself or one of my colleagues. So I sent an email out to my volunteers the other day, just advising them to change their scheduling, and I told them that I had felt like the boy who cried wolf. But at the end of that story, the wolf shows up and eats everyone. So it is coming. I don't know exactly when. I don't know exactly how the court is going to handle it. I'll talk a little bit more about the governor's order and the CDC order in a second, but just in terms of pure numbers, it is going to come. We are, as I said, it was March cases. It could be that we see sort of a smaller number of April, May, June, and July cases, the cases that were unaffected under the CARES Act, the properties that were unaffected under the CARES Act. It could be that we see that for a couple more months. The big sort of crush that we're waiting on is the September cases after the moratorium expired. I have spoken again with a couple judges, sort of off the record, and with opposing counsel, and there's no dates for any of those yet. They've been filed, but there's no dates.
How many? I'm sure there'll be many questions for you, but
Sure.
you know how many filings there were for the February, March cases? Like how many? What's the share of cases that they've heard?
So I don't have the filing numbers myself. You'd have to ask the court for that. But I can tell you that I remember I think it was the beginning of June, it was an 8,000 case backlog.
Right.
Now, a lot of those were dismissed by the court ahead of time, or they haven't been scheduled, because if the landlord didn't comply under the CARES Act, the notices that need to be sent out, the statement of compliance that they needed to file, most of which is not really relevant anymore, the court dismissed those, or they haven't scheduled them. So a lot of those 8,000 cases are never going to be heard, whether or not they'll be dismissed or pursued judgment. So I can't tell you exactly how many there are. I've tried to get an answer from the court on it. I haven't been successful. However, I expect that somebody from the county may have more success than I would. We are, at the end of the day, just another law firm as far as the judges are concerned. So if you find out, I would love to know.
So if we could figure out a way to kind of track and monitor data about the filings and the results, you're saying that would be helpful?
It would be helpful to know. Really, any bit of information we get is going to be helpful in planning for the future, but there's really only so much planning that we can do.
Yeah.
Some of these dismissals are because the tenants have paid. Some of these dismissals are because they've left. They've gone, and there's never going to be a case for that reason. And frankly, some of them are because I think a lot of these landlords' attorneys, this is not, I don't want to knock any of them, because we are all sort of trying to figure out where we're standing here. All of these moratoriums, all of these rules that have been put into place, there is no one person who has a full grasp on all of them. I think that our office has a better understanding than most do, but we are still struggling through it. And a lot of these landlords' attorneys, I think, have just decided, well, we're not sure if we're in compliance or not. So it's a quick enough process to refile a case. So I think a lot of them are just going to dismiss these cases because they think that they might have done something wrong or they might have not complied with this guideline, and they're just going to file later on. So, I don't know if this is going to be something that we see a crush in November or February, but it depends on what you consider to be the most important point of this. Is it in court? Is it the evictions? Is it the filing? There's an argument to be made for each of them, but they're all going to be at different times. So.
All right. Linda, is this the rest of the legal component, or should we pause to discuss legal now? Or
I think since Mr. Vitale has to get back to court, if you have questions for him, now is a good time to do that.
I would. So I would like to go over really briefly the experience that we're seeing regarding these orders, and then I'm happy to answer questions for as long as you need me to. Right now we're talking about the two sort of competing orders, and I think that they are competing. One is Governor Hogan's order, and the other is the CDC order. Now, the thing about, they both have their benefits, and they both have their pros and their cons. And as of now, I can't confidently identify trends for you within this county. We have some numbers from outside of this county, but because I don't work outside this county, I can't really talk about them other than the anecdotes that I've gotten. But I can give you an idea of what we're seeing now. So let's start with the CDC order. The CDC order is obviously a federal order. It's an order from an agency that has zero experience doing anything regarding housing, and it reads that way. It is a public health order, and that is how it reads. Every part of it, every line, the release that it supposedly provides is designed in furtherance of public health, or supposed to be, at least. Because it's a federal order, evictions and landlord-tenant law in general is a hyper-local set of laws. It's going to be different. It's different from county to county. Frankly, it's different from judge to judge, which is an issue with every legal matter. But, we've seen a lot of sort of untrained judges. They're tapping more judges to come in who don't have a lot of experience with this. So, there's going to be gaps with the CDC order. The CDC order says something along the lines of like no act in furtherance of eviction, which I would argue means you can't file an eviction. However, the Chief Judge Morrissey's administrative order has not interpreted it that way. That is what's leading to the reserved judgment. It's not really a suspended judgment. It's not really an actual term. There's not even a spot in their form for it. They're just sort of writing it along the bottom to say like reserved for judgment for possession. This is how much is owed. So there's a lot of gaps there that need to be filled in, and they're going to be filled in one case at a time, unfortunately. Governor Hogan's order will last longer. I mean, I stopped trying to make predictions years ago on this kind of stuff, but this state of emergency is almost certainly going to last longer than the end of the year. That's my expectation. I think that's most people's expectation. So Governor Hogan's order is going to provide this relief for a longer period of time than the CDC order. It is harder to raise, however. Judges have indicated that they expect to see proof that income has been lost. Some judges have stuck by that. Some judges haven't. We've had one judge who was simply prompting clients or prompting tenants to say, were you working before COVID? Yes. Did you lose income because of COVID? Yes. No proof is required. No writing is required. No bills or termination letters, bank statements, any of that. Other judges have indicated that they would want to see these documents. They would want to see, a letter saying you got terminated, a letter saying your daycare's defunct, so you got to stay home with your kid. Bank statements showing that the enhanced unemployment wasn't enough to meet your rental needs. So, they have their pros and cons. I have my concerns with clients on the CDC declaration just because it is under penalty of perjury and there's a lot of sort of ambiguity there. I don't expect it to be an issue. Really, it's just being overly cautious on my part. I have urged our clients and anyone that we've spoken to regarding this to very carefully go over what the CDC declaration asks of clients, asks of tenants, because there's criminal consequences. Other issues that I have seen specifically with the order, and it's sort of an open question, there are penalties for landlords who violate this knowingly. One is it's anywhere between one is up to $100,000. Basically, you get up to $500,000, depending on if you're an individual or an organization that violates it, and if it causes, I think, injury or death, or hospitalization, stay, or death. So, but it's not clear who enforces that. I don't, because it's a civil, it's a criminal penalty, and I don't have the authority to fine landlords or anybody else $100,000 as much as I would love to have that authority. And it's not clear that the state would have this authority at all. It appears to be a federal issue that some federal agency would need to do something on, whether that's the Department of Justice or the U.S. attorneys, or I don't know. So that's sort of, that's the teeth of this order, and I don't know whose teeth they actually are. That's one of the issues. So, just really briefly, I wanted to raise a couple concerns, and And like I said, I'm happy to answer questions about our experience in court or any other questions about this process or the protections or the lack thereof. There was a mention about tenant holding over actions. We are seeing an increase. It is my opinion that we are seeing an increase in other filings to get around the bar, these moratoriums, whether they are tenant holding overs that are being filed. I have one potential case that I believe is a forcible detainer that is really just a failure to pay rent case. And most disturbingly, we've been getting more calls about self-help evictions. Landlords are just changing the locks. We are doing what we can on this. The civil process for getting that resolved is slow, and it puts a lot of people at risk to have landlords being able to do this and not be corrected immediately. Now, there's mechanisms for that, and I know that Rosie does her best to address this issue when it's jurisdictionally appropriate, but there are gaps. Those gaps, those room rentals, people are going to be put out on the street. So that's a problem we're seeing.
Okay. I know that you're on a tight time crunch. Councilmember Hucker also needs to return to his normally scheduled programming for the day. So he's asked if he could ask a question. I haven't received any other requests yet, but this is a good time for us to ask more questions about the legal issues generally. Councilmember Hucker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to all of you for this quick briefing. It's very helpful, and I wish I could stay. I have to meet with one of the county executives appointees in 7 minutes. So, Frank or Rosie, could you comment on just 2 quick questions? How, in terms of what's available to our tenants, how much is legal advice and how much is legal representation? And what can we do to increase the amount of legal representation, not just advice? And number 2, Frank Vitale, to your point, for the judges that require proof from a tenant that they lost their job, how hard is that difficult to get if I'm a casual worker, as a landscaper, or contractor, security guard, whatever, and I might just get a phone call saying don't come into work, your job's gone, or my company went out of business, so now I can't even contact the boss?
So I'll speak to the first question first. What is the proportion between advice and representation? How can we increase representation? Specifically with this program, I can't represent anyone if they don't show up. That has been the number one issue is the people that have come in. Legal Aid is an LSE funded organization, so we have fairly strict eligibility guidelines. However, because of our partnerships with other organizations, most notably the Bar Foundation, we are able to be more flexible on that, particularly with regards to citizenship status, because normally we cannot help those who are undocumented. However, we are able to do so. It's just a matter of how we code it at the end. It has no actual effect on the representation itself. But again, people need to come. There have been plenty of clients or plenty of tenants that I've spoken with that I've looked at their case. I have gone and talked to the opposing counsel, and it turns out it's been dismissed. But we've had very few cases where people have come in. Most of them don't show. We've gone to every tenant that we see and say, would you like free legal assistance, potentially free legal representation? And they say no. We have been able to represent a handful of these individuals. But again, the bar is people need to show. And I think that is a bar that is going to naturally be gotten over soon. With regards to the second question, this is an issue, this is an area where judges have discretion. The specific judge that mentioned those documents, I am not overly concerned with, I don't want to say that there's no rules in district court, but there's not as many rules in district court. We don't have to go through the whole song and dance of introducing evidence on these types of cases. There's no minimum bar that needs to be raised. It just needs to be able to convince the judge, look, I lost money because of this. So this is another situation where the bar is really getting to these people ahead of time, getting to these tenants ahead of time to say, look, you got to bring this in. And sometimes they won't have anything, but they should have a bank statement to show that. They should be able to, we were in the process of developing an affidavit that tenants could sign, a form affidavit, when the CDC declaration came out, which I think does a good enough job on that. Part of the issue right now is because attendance has been so low, I haven't been able to test most of these. I haven't been able to test if the CDC order is sufficient to get relief under, or if the CDC declaration is sufficient to get relief under Governor Hogan's order. Because you don't need to prove loss of income under the CDC order. You just need to prove that you gave the declaration. But to get Governor Hogan's order, which is going to be longer, there's a lot of uncertainty on which one the court is applying. So as far as getting this information, it is dependent upon the tenant to bring this information in. We do have a printer with us, just from like a tech perspective. We do have a wireless hotspot because the court's Wi-Fi is atrocious, and we have a little printer that we use. However, we won't be able to do that for everyone once this starts going in earnest. So we've been encouraging every tenant we speak with, every partner we speak with, to tell tenants, you've got to get this information together. Because we're getting normal calls on top of all this. We have plenty of people who are just calling saying, can't pay my rent, my landlord says they're going to evict me. We'll give them advice then, and to prep for next time.
Okay.
So.
Thanks so much. Thanks for allowing me to join you, Hon.
Thank you. All right, we have a couple more questions on legal. Councilmember Jawando, followed by Councilmember Glass.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and good morning, Mr. Vitale. Thank you for the work you're doing. I know it's difficult under the circumstances you described, so we really appreciate it. Couple of questions. You said something about, I forget what you called them because there's really no legal term for them. If they were contingent or delayed judgments, or what did you refer to those as?
So the official, I don't know what the official description is, but it is a reserve. The court has been instructed to find that an amount is owed. Right, so let's say $2,000 is owed. They will write that on the bottom left of the complaint, which is the section where the judgment normally goes. $2,000 is owed, and then they will write for, like, reserved for JFP, judgment for possession. So it's not a suspended judgment, because that's a specific legal term. It is not, it's not even really a reserved judgment. It's reserved for a judgment, which is a lot of sort of lawyer nonsense hair splitting, but that's how the courts work on this.
So presumably there would need to be another hearing where a judgment is formally given?
So no, unfortunately no. The administrative order states that judgments will just be posted. No motion by either party. So okay. I can circulate I can send somebody here the administrative order. It's Judge Morrissey's administrative order. Came out about 2 weeks ago, just after the CDC order came out. It was actually based off of an administrative order that was just for this court. So Judge Morrissey oversees all the district courts. Judge Mitchell here oversees just our district court, and had basically written this for just Hogan's order, and then the CDC order came out like literally 20 minutes later. So it's just sort of applying that. It's a concern that I have, the judgment by posting, because there's no opportunity for the tenant to show that they paid to avoid a judgment. But yes, I hope that answers sort of it's a weird like song and dance that we're doing.
Well,
so.
It's concerning because, if you show that you can't pay, I think a fair interpretation of the reading, absent Judge Morrissey's, administrative order, which I would like you to send to everybody, is that if you show that failure that you can't pay due to COVID, that there should be no order. That would be reserved or put on hold, and so if they just have to be posted at a later date, that's concerning for the reason that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's something I think we're going to need to look into and a little more. You mentioned the issue about February. You're doing the February cases now, and so the people who have been making their best efforts, considering we're in September, to pay something over time. Many of them have paid February. So the court is not considering multiple months at a time, correct? Like they're considering one. Are the failure to pay rent cases that you're seeing? Is it just saying February one? It's just 1 month. You can't stack in multiple, correct?
So you normally can. They can normally say there's a box that they check that says any rent that's come due since it was filed. So sometimes we'll see March. It'll be February and March. Normally, a landlord will file a case on, like January 1st. It'll be set for February 3rd or whatever, and they'll charge for both. I think that there's a lot of readings that's of the various, like the CARES Act and the other moratorium that are in place that suggest that landlords can't be charging rent for that amount of time sort of after these orders were issued, after the CARES Act was issued, so without going through extra steps. And rather than going through extra steps for this old case, they're just going to file again.
Right. So
they are not, I am not 100% certain why they're not just updating these, but every large, and again, this should be said, right now we are not staffing the Friday cases. Because we have to have a staff member or two on site, we have, the demand for our services right now is really high for housing, but in Montgomery County, it's also, we have a huge amount of family law cases coming in, domestic law issues, domestic violence issues that require our attention. So we can't cover that third day yet. I'm working on trying to get it done, but we are not doing it yet. So this is all regarding the big firms that handle,
Sure.
they'll have the whole day. There'll be 60 cases that they've got.
So you're not getting the smaller Friday cases, these non-represented cases. Yeah. So I think you bring up a point that, we need to, DHCA, the council, everyone, we need to have a better handle on the data that's coming in, different types of cases, in the amounts and what they're saying, because to avoid the cliff that we all fear, we have to have a grip on that. And my last quick question to you, and I know other colleagues, I'll follow up with you offline because there's other things I'd like to ask you. But, the other types of evictions that constructive evictions that you mentioned, are ways around the law, either a holdover, which is something I've been very concerned about, in the lease. We were able to get the legislation to try to cap and increases, but that doesn't stop anybody from saying, okay, lease is over now, see you later, and the changing the locks. Do you have any data, and I know some of our advocates will come of this later, or examples or the numbers you're seeing of those types of things happening?
I don't have any data. I can tell you that happily the self-help eviction issue has not historically been a big problem in Montgomery County, at least as far as we see. I'm sure Rosie might have a different view on that because she sees these cases at a different stage. And the problem with the tenant holding over issues is that it's not something that is easily measured, because a savvy landlord or a savvy landlord's attorney doesn't need to tip their hand. We see these cases a lot where a pro se landlord will say, well, I'm not going to renew your lease because you haven't paid your rent. That, in my opinion, is getting around this case. It is also their legal right to do it that way. So unfortunately, it's difficult to measure data on this because it is it's not something that's very easy to identify unless you look, you have to look further at the case than it's really feasible to do for all of these cases. So
I appreciate it. Well, we'll follow up. I think the issue of the judgment being already put in, even if you meet the criteria for not being evicted, is an issue that we need to revisit. The number of cases and backlog and when they could be filed, and these other types of potentially working around the orders. So appreciate all the work you're doing, and thank you, Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you, Frank, and thank you, Councilmember Joanna. Thank you, Frank. Evan.
Thank you very much. Really important conversation. And I'll start off by saying thank you to Linda McMillan for an excellent packet, lots of context and correspondence from all levels of government, which is really what we're talking about right now. I just want to pull out some quotes from Attorney General Brian Frosh in the open letter, or the letter he wrote to Governor Hogan, dated September 1st, where he said, quote, "We now expect to see a huge wave of civil legal filings. If these cases are allowed to move forward, we anticipate mass evictions, repossessions, wage garnishments, and more outcomes that may engender the lives of those affected directly." And then goes on to say, "This flood of new civil cases will hit an already strained civil justice system that is unprepared to handle it." And so, Frank, I want to thank you for the work that you're doing on behalf of those who need it here in Montgomery County. And one of the things that you mentioned that I actually was unaware of and would love for you to share publicly a little bit more is you talk about volunteers who are helping in this effort. Can you talk about that program and how my colleagues and I and county government can try and find more volunteers to do this important work?
Sure. So as I think alluded to, this is sort of the next stage of an evolved form of a program that we have been working on starting for a while, for a couple of years now, and it started up at the beginning of this year before the world ended. We were focusing primarily on non-FCPR cases, cases where, because in normal times, there's not really much to do on a failure to pay rent case for an attorney. You can come in, you make sure you check the numbers, and there's certainly corner cases where an attorney can really be helpful. But in terms of where our resources were best spent, it was these non-failure to pay rent cases. So what we did is we ended up reaching out to, and actually this was my predecessor who did a lot of the legwork on reaching out to everyone. He's no longer with us, so I'm administering this program. But he ended up reaching out to the Bar Foundation, the Montgomery County Bar Foundation, Bar Association, to recruit volunteer attorneys who would agree to come in for some amount of time on one particular day or another to provide this representation. So I would say that the majority of these volunteers are semi-retired long-term attorneys who have practiced in Montgomery County for a good long time, who may have done some of this work before. Most of them have not. The few that have done this generally did it on the other side. And there are also a handful of younger attorneys, a couple that are actually fresh out of school. So the way that we've done it, and we've done this a couple times now, is we set up a training where it's generally me, or sometimes in concert with a colleague, will go over sort of the basics of landlord-tenant law, which on the surface is really not that complicated, especially if you've practiced law in the past, especially if you've practiced law for 30 years. It's easy to pick it up and go. We do spend some more time on the nuances of subsidized housing and some of the other tactics that we're able to use to protect tenant rights, clients' rights, and occupancy. We do that training. In exchange for taking that training, they agree to take on a shift, right? So right now our shifts are, there's a 3-hour shift in the morning and a 3-hour shift in the afternoon on Wednesdays. I'm looking at expanding shifts to Mondays soon, but it's not quite necessary yet. We're able to handle this with our staff. But these are volunteer attorneys who come in and take cases. So, and we greatly value their assistance. We have a lot right now. Some of them are, because a lot of our volunteers are older, they are not comfortable about coming into court first, to improve social distancing, which we completely understand, and we are able to make do fairly easily with the lawyers that we've got. Although I don't know if that will continue to be the case as these matters increase, and presumably, I don't know, as we get into flu season, it might become a bigger concern for people.
Right. So thank you. So if people want to get involved, I should encourage them to reach out to the Montgomery County Bar Foundation. Is that correct?
You can have them reach out to me. You can have them reach out directly to me by email. It's generally the best.
Right.
And we can talk about, we recorded the training last time, so people can just review it on their own time. And it goes over how the program works, what we expect of our volunteers, as well as all the substantive legal issues. And this one does focus more on training. So there is nothing in that section on the CDC order, but I'm happy to speak to individual volunteers about that. And we're there. I'm there to help review cases, to give assistance whenever somebody needs it. So they're not going in on their own. We do the screening. We'll go over this with a client really briefly. We'll put their stuff in a folder. I will walk it out. I'll give it to one of the other volunteers. I'll make the introduction, and then I'll go. And then if they need help, they can shut me down.
Well, thank you for that information. I'll certainly disseminate it and encourage those who want to help our neighbors do so. And again, I appreciate everything that you all are doing. This information is important, the work that you're doing. And I apologize, I have to bow out for an 11 o'clock meeting, but I know how to reach out to all of you, many of whom I've been working with over the last number of months. So thank you all for this update and the important work you're doing.
Thank you, Councilmember Glass. Much appreciated. Again, I think this conversation is so crucial, and I think we're hearing now how much is at stake in the legal system and how many ways people need our help. I think it's really, I'm pleased that the PHED committee, insisted upon focusing our resources more on providing legal support. And we had quite a battle earlier this year over these funds and whether to reappropriate or appropriate them for different purposes, I should say. And council staff gave us a very helpful recommendation about the need to increase our support for legal assistance. And I think that, it has been clear that this is money well spent. Frank, how can we help? What could Montgomery County do? You did ask about tracking some of the information, but what else could we do?
So I would like to be able to understand exactly when these cases are going to hit. I think unfortunately some of the information just isn't available yet. The court has scheduled these cases, but as you get them, I would love to see it. As of for the month of September, we have the resources we need to meet this week for Wednesday cases. Right now, the issues that we're seeing are things that we cannot address, not because of a lack of resources, but because of the nature of this organization. We're a law firm, first and foremost. We're a nonprofit law firm, we're civil legal aid, but we are a law firm. We take cases, represent clients, and then close those cases. So we are also prevented from doing a certain amount of work, certain types of work. So class actions are not available under LSC regulations. I am not allowed to lobby under LSC regulations or ask for any change in law. However, I believe if I phrase it the right way, I can say this. There are gaps that I can't meet, the legal aid can't meet. I have a self-help eviction that is coming up that I have to deal with today. And by a stroke of luck, I may have some legal argument and the opportunity to present it. What I can't do is, this gentleman called police when he was being evicted by his landlord. This wasn't in the county, it was within the city of Tacoma Park, so it's jurisdictional concern. I don't expect anybody here to change this anytime soon, but it's frustrating to me that this is a law that is written in the Montgomery, it's in the state's code. It's in Real Property 8216, I think. This is not allowed. It's specifically prohibited, and nothing was done. And he is in a hotel. We don't know how long he'll be able to afford to be in a hotel, and I don't know how long it'll take me to get him back into his apartment. I can't do anything about that. I can't do anything about reaching out to tenants ahead of time to let them know what they need to bring in. And I can't really get in touch with larger landlords to try and resolve multiple chunks of cases in the way that somebody else may be able to. So we always appreciate more volunteers. And I think that my central office in Baltimore would throttle me if I didn't say that we would also always appreciate more funding if possible. But I'm not going to, I can't speak intelligently to that at this point.
I don't think you should be shy about asking. I mean, I think we need to meet the needs, and we all know that legal is a big part of it. So I'm glad.
I would be remiss if I didn't point out that we are doing everything we can. We rely on outreach from our partner organizations. So the work that Costa and Renters Alliance are doing too, to reach these tenants because the best way that a tenant can be helped is that they don't have to go to court.
Exactly.
By the time they come to court, it's sort of like the last. You don't want to get there at all. If that rent can be paid ahead of time, or if a resolution can be made with the landlord ahead of time, we're not. Realistically, we don't expect to take every single case that can come in. I'd like to see them resolved ahead of time. So filling the needs that we can't, that's really what we need. Again, resources are always appreciated. Volunteers, especially attorneys, volunteer attorneys, absolutely send them my way. Non-attorneys, I'm certainly happy to talk to them, but they could be a better fit for a different organization. Just because
let me say,
they need them more than we do.
I would encourage you to ask us for more funding.
Okay.
And, I think that goes for this whole set of needs. So that's a statement I apply to you, but also to the other organizations. And it certainly seems like we ought to have some kind of ongoing work group where, we're the groups on the ground are in regular communication. If we don't already have that, it sounds like you have some opportunities to work with our partners. And again, thanks to the council's focus on this issue, starting last spring, we have a group of organizations that are working. It sounds like we're going to hear more about that in a minute, but there may be a way that we could build a kind of a broader strategy here and having organizations teaming up, taking different pieces of this. Linda, do you have any comment here or thought about how to process this information?
I think I certainly can follow up with Mr. Vitale after the whole discussion, but I think if you hear Ms. Branda's presentation, so you understand what's happening especially with the $20 million rent relief, and then hear the comments of the partners, then I think we can think about how best to keep moving the whole issue forward. But certainly, in addition to the specific information data that's been asked for, we can follow up around the issues of funding and what may be needed regarding this entire issue.
Okay.
But I do think the issue of getting it resolved before it gets to court is really key. And so however that can be accelerated, especially as we have these funds for rent assistance, so that you don't end up with this judgment sitting there sort of in abeyance. It's like taken care of, never got to court. That would be to everybody's benefit. But I think when you hear from the partners, you'll hear that as well.
Okay, great. All right, good. Let's keep moving. Thank you. That was terrific conversation. Frank, anything else you wanted to say or no? Okay, good.
I have to run, but I'm available by email or by phone if anybody has any questions. I can certainly send that to Frank or Linda in a bit, along with the administrative order. Feel free to reach out to me. So I do need to run right now. So thank you all for your time. Thank you all for the help that you're providing. Nobody can do this alone, and we appreciate, like I said, the wolf is coming, and we appreciate everyone standing in the field with us. So,
well, Frank, we thank you. Your service here is meaning so much to our community, and we thank you. We really do. All providing an incredible need and a service that we desperately need now. So thanks for what you're doing.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
All right. We'll keep moving through. So,
Alana, I think you're up.
Okay. Let me share my screen with you. I have just a couple slides. I know you have copies of them, so I will try to move through them quickly given the time, but just for the record, I'm Alana Branda. I'm the Deputy Chief with Services to End and Prevent Homelessness within HHS. And so just a really quick reminder, we do have year-round programs unrelated to COVID that continue to remain active, that provide financial assistance to households with eviction orders. So, the cases Frank is talking about that are coming up that, were February cases or whatnot, we do have assistance programs to support those families. We also can provide assistance to households where it's an informal lease, right? It maybe is a multi-generational family and there are issues there in terms of staying together and paying rent. We can support those. And then also really critical that I want to take a moment to remind is we have our Office of Home Energy programs. These are income-dependent grants, credits that are effectively put on your home heating or electric bills. And as getting cold and people are thinking of turning their heat back on, we encourage everyone to apply. Even though there is still a moratorium on shutoff notices that keeps on getting continued, we don't know when that will end also. And any resource we can put in a family's pocket is critical at this time. So a family may not have been eligible pre-COVID, but we do just look at recent income, so they may, be eligible now. And so we encourage everyone to use those programs also. Okay, so now really to the meat of why we're here today. So I wanted to share with you guys our development of our Homeless Prevention Index. So we really took the time in thinking through where we were back in May when we started mobilizing on our first COVID rent relief program funding, to really take the time in between the two to really think about how are we doing this in a way that really promotes equity, that really looks at the issues that are impacting those that may become homeless in our community. So we did a review of best practices across the country. We consulted with many community leaders, and then we looked at our local data to develop an index and really target geographic areas within our county. And so these are all the criteria that we built into our prevention index. And two that I really want to touch on that I think speak to some of the earlier conversations too is under housing stress, we actually use turnover. And I think this speaks to, as Frank was talking about, that there are many cases that don't actually end up with the sheriff executing the eviction, right? There may have been either an illegal change of locks that was not caught, or just the pressure that the resident felt that they didn't feel that there was any opportunity for them to recover from this, that they just moved out before that eviction even needed to be scheduled. So we thought really looking at turnover will help us get into the heart of some of that the inconsistency and instability of housing. For COVID unemployment risk, we also look specifically at where people are living who are in the most hard-hit industries. So retail, hospitality, food service, right? Where are those industries that are the most hardest hit that people are living in? And so then we did review our index with the regional service centers. We looked through DHCA data. We also looked at where people who have been receiving HHS services in all of our service areas, where they live. And then while we were finishing this, the Urban Institute actually came out with a prioritization index very similar to ours. They couldn't use exactly the same data since some of it is proprietary to Montgomery County, but they actually came out with nationwide how people should be targeting their eviction prevention dollars. And there was a lot of overlap between the measures and the focus used. And then the CDC Social Vulnerability Index. And with that targeting, what we are able to do now is be able to see that we are able to target 27% of rental units. This is half of the low-cost rental units in the county, and half of those also that have been experiencing high rates of turnover. You can see on the side comparison of the racial and ethnicity of the county as a whole compared to those in these targeted areas that we are focusing on. And then also similarly, some of the poverty rate and average income. So again, we're really trying to just get to the heart of who is most likely to end up an eviction or an instability of housing to lead towards an experience of homelessness. And this is the map that we ended up with that that highlights those areas for targeting. And I'll explain in just a drop a little bit more of the targeting. And so we use this as really the impetus for our COVID rent relief program phase 2. So as touched upon earlier, the maximum grants are $4,000 per household. Importantly, it is open to both households with formal and informal leases. So if it's a handshake, I'm renting a bedroom from you, we can work with those households also. We are not asking for any Social Security or birth certificate information. We do need some sort of photo ID to confirm who we're speaking with, but that is about it. We have moved the application into an online seamless docs portal that basically allows a self-certification for almost everything. So we really have a very limited need of documentation to supplement, and I think this speaks to Council Member Reamer, I believe it was you, your comments about the documentation, like if a business had closed or they can't get in touch with a previous employer. So we really try to allow for self-certification in pretty much all those cases, so that shouldn't be an extra burden on someone who is already experiencing a housing crisis. And then what we're doing with that homeless prevention index is we are targeting our outreach and a prioritization of processing of the applications for those areas. It is not an eligibility criteria, but it is just allowing us to ensure that we are focusing, especially these initial resources in those areas. So most of the program criteria has remained the same from COVID, the rent relief program round 1. You do have to be behind on rent. If you're eligible for unemployment, you've applied for that. Your current income, so we're only looking at income from the previous 30 days, needs to be below 60% of area median income. And of that income, you need to be paying more than 50% of your income towards rent to be eligible. And so just to share with you a little bit, since we opened, yeah.
Sorry, I recall that the payment is actually made to the landlord, is that right?
Yeah, in almost all cases, the payment goes to the landlord. We are providing communication to the tenant so they know when that payment is being sent over. We also have many residents choose to pick up, or we can mail the check to them, and it's just issued to in the landlord's name. On a case-by-case basis, we are able to make some adjustments to that if there is if a landlord is refusing to register in our system, there are ways that we can work around that to make sure that the money still gets out.
Okay.
So then with that seamless doc application, so I just pulled some initial data on ethnicity and race of who is submitting the applications through there. So as of the 16th, when I pulled this data, we had just under 1,100 applications. I checked this morning, and we're over 1,400 at the moment. Those do include people who have either come to the site themselves or have been directed to the site through partners or through their properties. And it does include those who called 311 and were put on the wait list. We have been proactively calling each of those individuals, either offering them the option to complete the application themselves through the link, or for us to walk through them with it and complete it for them on the phone. So this does include about an additional, or inclusive of this, about 300 of this 1,100 represented are those that have been on the wait list that we're helping to process their application. We're working on filtering through the data. If you don't know, there's, I think it's something like 19 Montgomery counties throughout the United States. And some of them have, when people in other states have been searching Montgomery County rent programs, were popping up. So we have gotten some applications from out of state that we're filtering out, and also, applications from others in this region who are just, everyone's trying to find support wherever they can. So we're going to continue to monitor the applications coming in. We are flagging applications that do have a eviction hearing scheduled to make sure, going back to the points about the education, to make sure that they know the resources, they know documentation to bring to help with the education. We cannot provide legal assistance, as HHS, but we can make sure that they know the resources of where to go and the importance of showing up at that hearing and being able to participate in the legal process. We do have checks already going out. I think that was the question that came up earlier. So the day that we opened, we started processing cases and pushing checks out, and we will continue to do such as soon as we have everything ready to determine eligibility. We push that check out immediately. And again, the expectation is that everything has to be out by the end of December at this point. So I just want to kind of recap from Director Asim's comments, from Frank's, and from mine, just a little bit of a sense of where do we go from here, right? That's kind of the big question. We've talked about what's coming. We're in the midst of it already, right? And so what are some options from here? So a little bit of a recap that Director Asim mentioned, but there is a state program that was a total of $10 million for the whole state of Maryland. There was about 100 properties in the county that were eligible to apply for some of these funds on behalf of their residents. So we are starting to see some of that be released and come in, and they're continuing to accept applications. They haven't spent all of their $10 million. There is another CDBG round 3 that's already committed, coming directly to Montgomery County. And then we have the opportunity as the county to apply for a state allocation of CDBG funds that the state got. The total is $15 million for the whole state, so we'll hopefully get a portion of that. And then some things to think about locally. I know we've talked a lot in the past about our rental assistance program. That's the shallow subsidy of $200 a month currently that HHS administers. There have been conversations, and I know the code change was made by the council back in, I believe, May. Regulations should be coming shortly that would allow that fee to be adjusted from a flat fee of $200 to 25% of rent, which would, if we go to the maximum, would take us to around $400. So options are to either reduce the number of participants and go up to the $400, or look at increased funding for that. Similarly, HOC has a rent supplement program that's up to $600 a month in subsidy for households. We also can be having conversations around the recordation tax receipts that do come in to DHCA that are mostly, that is what feeds funding for rent assistance program and the rent supplement program. Is there a different allocation to consider how those funds are used? And working with HOC on housing choice vouchers, there's actually an application currently open to apply for some additional vouchers called mainstream vouchers. And, you know, are we adjusting how we target the different opportunities and the different vouchers that we have? And then from a policy focus, there are some things that we can be doing in general to looking at in terms of protecting residents through this process and supporting our households. And so ban the box legislation, I know some of that is in process at the moment too, but, you know, really how are we thinking about how are we decriminalizing homelessness and people's ability to access housing? And so when we have landlords who are either just ignoring an application because someone marked something on their application, or are running criminal background checks that are so broad that restricts people's access to housing, you know, it is making it harder to keep people housed and sustain their housing. Just cause eviction, I know that has come up a lot in conversation with the PHED committee also. That does need to happen on the state level, so that's just something to be thinking about how we are interplaying with our state colleagues, and ensuring that people, that landlords can't just, you know, not renew a lease because they don't want a tenant there. And that speaks to some of the cases and the loophole that Frank is finding now, that people are going to tenant holdover versus non-payment because the landlords are forcing or allowing a lease to expire without any justification besides putting someone in a different bucket for legal purposes. And then we have many housing programs that we can look at also on how we can leverage some of these housing programs or opportunities to further support households that are struggling. So as we mentioned, the rental assistance, we have our rapid rehousing programs that provide subsidies anywhere from 3 to 24 months to households that are exiting homelessness. It's a very intensive case management and housing subsidy that tapers off as we're able to work with the household to increase their income over that time. But that's a program that also gives flexibility to some of those industries that are more impacted. Permanent supportive housing to, again, support households who have a history of homelessness and don't have the opportunity to change their income really in the long term. And, just focusing on that deeply affordable housing, right? When we have polled many people in our homeless continuum and many of them have income, their struggle is that they can only afford about $300 to $500 a month in rent. And with, the potential surges coming in, we have to really be thinking, how are we getting to all these different income levels? I know we'll be coming to HHS committee later this month, or I think it's early next month, but just thinking about our shelter capacity, that if many of these methods are not able to help people stay in their homes, how are we ensuring that our shelters can maintain hold the capacity of those needed so that we don't have a major increase in street homelessness. And I would just end with the note, that I know this, you're all are very aware of this, but recovery is an extremely long-term commitment that we're making, that we're going to have to track in years and not months. And I know many of these programs are focused on, we have $20 million to get out for the next 4 months, but, we need to be thinking about how are we supporting some of these households for the next years in some of these industries that are not going to see a recovery in the way that we think about pre-COVID. Some of our industries are just changed in the long term. And so how are we building in a system that provides those long-term supports to bridge the gap between what we know will be a long-term change in income, where we have not seen that change in rent expectations? So with that, let me stop sharing my screen and happy to take any questions.
Okay, that's a lot. Well, we'll see if my colleagues have questions. This issue of tenant holding over is sort of vexing one, because essentially you have tenants who don't have a lease. I have always tried to advocate that we want tenants to sign leases, and that issue comes up in different ways as we tackle these issues. And I think we're now seeing a really big problem with the month-to-month sector. And this is a time when, people really need the kind of protection that they could get from a lease. So it's vexing, and we need to work on that some more. All right, Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you. Appreciate everybody's work. This is such a massive issue and such a huge challenge that we face. And it's one of the many examples during COVID that the cracks in our society have been blown wide open. These are not new issues. They are just far more significant. The magnitude and the depth of the issues have reached far more people during this crisis, when you have unemployment that is tripling, when you have the challenges related to these issues. It's true here. It's true with food security. It's true with just about every other major issue that we face in our community and across the country. With regards to all the programs, and I appreciate the overview of everything that we have going on, and it's clear that we are doing quite a bit and trying to put as many darts on the dartboard, so to speak, to try to hit this crisis. But how much money of all those different programs has actually been sent out to the residents who need it? How much of it has actually been deployed? Do we have that before us? I haven't seen that as part of the presentation.
So for the COVID rent relief, I can speak to from the round one, it was a little bit slower. It did take us some time, so we did not finish deploying all of that 3.5. what our plan is to kind of use that as, since the COVID rent relief round 2 does have a very finite spend by deadline of that 20 million, that this would allow us to kind of have some money at the end to trickle out, so cases that maybe we didn't quite close by that time, we would be able to do that. But we've put out from the 2 million, we have put out more than half of that. And then from the 20 million, we just started releasing checks. I think the first check went out September 9th, because that was when we launched the program on the 8th. So I have to say I give credit to my team, because we are used to doing work in a different way, right? We're used to getting a case assigned to us that is a household that is in an eviction process, and working with them on a resolution, and working with them for the next month on developing a housing strategy and a plan to maintain their housing. And we have switched to we have to see if you're eligible for 4,000 and get that check out. So our team has been getting closing cases in a day, right, from the day they get the referral, and pushing it out. So those are starting to get to go out. And we should be able to give an update fairly soon, after we're at least maybe another week or two in, of how quickly we're able to, on average, get those cases out. But we had ones that we've been able to get out in a day, so we are working as quickly as possible to get those funds out.
Okay, is it possible to start getting like a weekly report of how much of the actual funds have gone? I mean, this is not unique to you and your team. I appreciate the new nature of that, but we have had significant challenges with all of the different programs that we are doing at the county level, and the speed at which the money is actually getting to folks who desperately need it. And I just want to make sure, we do have, we are very close now. We're basically at the end of September at this point. And so we're, 3 months away from the carriage turning into a pumpkin, so to speak, and making sure that we have the funds that are out. And I think there's some unease by a number of folks in the community, and I think shared by council members, to make sure that we are deploying the resources to the greatest extent possible with the greatest sense of urgency possible. So is that reasonable for a weekly report to the council specifically on how much of this has been?
Yeah, I'll coordinate with HHS Fiscal and OMB on that. And I would say, 100%, like, it has kept me and members of our team up many nights, this deadline. And we are 100% committed to getting those funds out. We have a couple of backup plans that we've been floating around internally in terms of, if we do see that the way our process is set up is just not getting us there as quickly as we need to, what are some other ways to make sure? Because we can't leave this money on the table. As Asim started out with, we know the need is so much more than this 20 million that the worst thing that would happen is that we leave even a penny of this on the table. So I am with you 100% that we need to make sure that we are getting every penny of that out the door before our December 30th deadline.
Appreciate that. I think it'd be helpful to know what those contingency plans are and when that decision will be made, because switching gears is not a fast thing to do either. That's very difficult. Again, it's not unique to you and your team. It's not unique to Montgomery County. Government is not set up to be moving as quickly as we have been asked to move, and that we need to move, given the crisis that we're in. And so I just think, having everybody on the same page and understanding how quickly this funding is going to get out, and if there is an issue, how quickly we are going to move into contingency plans and what those contingency plans are, I think would be very helpful. So that's the 20 million. I think you lumped in the additional 3.5 million, or the 2 million of the 3.5 million, because you kind of, added that to this program, which I think is, makes sense. How about the other programs? Do we have data so far on, we do have a few other programs, the CDBG money through HOC, and some of the other, programs as well that we have that are slightly different, but are all attacking the same vexing issue. Do we have updates on how much of that funding has been deployed and where things stand there?
So, Councilmember Friedson, in terms of the CDBG rental assistance program, as I mentioned before, we reincarnated this entire program. It was hard to administer as we, rolled it out originally. So my understanding is that now HOCs have started to review these applications. So they will start dispersing, this money hopefully shortly. So we can certainly provide you an update.
Okay, I just want to confirm. So far, zero of that money has gone out. Is that accurate?
My sense is no more than 4 or 5 tenants from the original program were helped. When HUD gave us new guidance, gave us more flexibility, and we reincarnated this entire program, the application process ended on August 31st. So HOC is starting to review those applications now. And so we'll get the update from them, and we can provide those updates to the council on a weekly basis with other updates.
Okay, well, that would be helpful. I mean, you can understand the concern here.
Sure.
The council first stepped up with these funds, in the early goings of this crisis. The CDBG money then came subsequent to that. The $20 million rental assistance has come after. And of all of these programs with these various different timelines, it sounds to me so far, with 25 to 30 million appropriated, only, a couple million at most has been actually deployed to help renters who are in a state of crisis, as we've all talked about, which is extremely concerning. And I appreciate the update, and I appreciate the fact that we are moving forward, and hopefully we are now finally in a position to actually get the funds out to the folks who need it. But press releases and applauding on all of us for appropriating funding doesn't help people. Actually getting the money to those who need it is the only way that we can actually solve the challenges that we have, recognizing that we can't solve them all, but we can do a lot for many, and but that only happens if we actually deploy the funds and actually get the funds out there. So I've made my point, and I will leave it at that. The other is, there have been a number of different efforts in terms of the crisis response, but we do have the eviction and homeless prevention group. I don't know if Frank Demarais is going to present after this. I can wait for that, but I know that a major part of that, and it's related to what we've just talked about, was looking at identifying actions and policy options available to mitigate evictions and homelessness, and recommending those actions and policies, presumably to the county council. I am not aware of any recommendations coming forward. I just wanted to get a status on whether there were recommendations and what the timing is that we should expect to have recommendations, and what the timeline would be in terms of actually moving forward and turning some of that group's work into action that actually helps people.
I can have Frank chime in quickly on this one, but I can tell you that there is a letter which has either gone out or going out shortly from the county executive and Prince George's County executive to the governor to include tenant holding over cases within the governor's executive order, and also not asking the tenant to demonstrate COVID-19 related, laws, and also to extend the eviction moratorium until January 2021.
Let me just give a summary of the three. Yeah, thank you very much. It's Frank Demarais, the Deputy Director, DHCA, and I was the lead for the recovery work group on eviction and homeless prevention. Our primary focus was on, we broke it into 3 areas, which was the financial assistance and rental assistance, mitigation, was the additional tenant support, information, education, empowerment, and then there were policy components. The focus was initially on scoping the degree of our rental assistance need. The survey that was conducted led to the recommendation that was made through the Recovery Work Group Executive Committee framing it as we're in about a $50 million area of overall financial need. The $20 million CARES Act recommendation was a recommendation out of the recovery work group. The other efforts that have gone on were focused on the level of assistance that every tenant's going to need to understand their rights, understand access, and then to be able to work with their landlord to mitigate and manage their way through it. So the participation that you heard about earlier, we have our partners with us that can speak more to it, but that the recovery work group's recommendations were revolving around how to stand up those additional resources, how to focus the assistance on these actions to protect tenants, based on these eviction moratoria and the kinds of assistance they need to get through that. And these all worked through and were made, part of the recommendations through the recovery work group and the executive committee. And then Director McGowan just spoke to one of the policy recommendations related to support of extending and broadening the governor's order. There were a range of things that were reviewed, and these are the kinds of actions that were determined to be the highest impact on the mitigation of eviction. As was mentioned earlier by Maryland Legal Aid Frank Vitale, getting to the tenants before they get to court is critical. We've expanded, a very broad campaign of outreach, communication through the partnership network, through the outreach with the community, Office of Community Partners, the kinds of actions we've taken to get the word out and to sustain it and to do it in a sustained fashion over the next, 4 to 6 months is the structural approach that came out of those recommendations.
Okay, so just to be clear, the direction was to not have new or amended policy recommendations at the county level, more focused on the one state recommendation that the county executive is appealing to the governor, which is very similar to what the council had done, I think, a month or longer ago to the governor, which I think we all are supportive of. But more based on programmatic and communications-based efforts. Is that accurate?
Very focused on the near-term 3 to 6 month impacts that actions by the county can have on the tenant community to assist them in working through the current crisis.
Okay. So it'd be great if there were a specific report or memo or something that this committee in particular, the council more broadly, could have to see, what are the actionable, specific things that you are talking about that the county is doing based on the recommendations of the group in order to address this issues. This set of issues, because it's not just one issue. I'm not aware of that being presented to us. I think it would be helpful if we did have it so we could understand how things are moving forward.
Yeah, Councilor Peterson, so we are working on demobilizing these work groups. As a part of that process, we are working on our checklist, what the recommendations were, what actions were taken, so we can document everything, and then we're going to present these reports to the executive committee, and I guess those will be shared with the council as well on all of our groups.
Okay, great. I hope that we can streamline that process. Just send what you have to the executive committee. Also send it to the council. I think, we have a bureaucracy that we have created in order to figure out how to cut through the bureaucracy to solve problems in the crisis that we have. And, my concern throughout this is that we, perhaps are waiting for the perfect solutions to problems as the problems get worse and worse. So I think we need to move quicker on everything that we have, including the communication of what is being done, because that is, knowledge is power. So, we need the tree to fall in the forest and for everybody to hear it and for everybody to know what is happening and for everybody to be on the same page that we can work together to solve these issues. So I appreciate that help and look forward to working together on it. Look forward to seeing the formal report and the series of specific policy and process and programmatic recommendations that the groups put together and how the county is moving forward to implement them with the partners as you discussed. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
All right. It was my impression that some of the recommendations that Ilana gave to us were from that group in process, but I think Councilmember Friedson's correct. I'd like to see it written up more formally. All right. So, Linda, where are we in our agenda? I know our partners have been waiting very patiently.
I'd like to give each of the organizations just a couple minutes to give you what they're observing, what they see on the ground working with the tenants and with the landlords. And then if you have questions of them, they're here to also discuss with you. So I don't have a particular order. The way it's listed on the memo would be to start with the Housing Initiative Partnership. So perhaps if we could just get a couple of minutes of comments there and then just work down through the other organizations.
Great.
Good morning. Hi, thank you so much. My name is Mary Hunter. Can you hear me?
Sure can.
Great. I'm the director of the Housing Counseling Program at Housing Initiative Partnership. We've been working in Montgomery County since 2009. We have offices in Germantown and Gaithersburg. And so we're just really pleased to be a part of this group, a partner with DHCA, DHHS, and all the legal aid and all the other nonprofit partners here. It's been a concerted effort that we've been meeting weekly, all the providers and DHCA, to provide assistance to tenants to help them avoid eviction. So Housing Initiative Partnership, we're working remotely right now. We do have staff that go to our offices occasionally to assist, right now, especially tenants, with paperwork. Our role in this eviction prevention initiative is twofold. We are providing direct advice and counseling to tenants, and we're also doing outreach to tenants. We have in terms of our staff currently, we have one full-time intake specialist, 3 full-time counselors, 1 full-time managing counselor, and they're all bilingual in English and Spanish. We're receiving about 7 to 10 calls each day from tenants. Our focus is entirely on rental counseling right now. I would say that we do foreclosure prevention counseling, and during the foreclosure crisis, our focus was almost entirely on foreclosure prevention. So we respond to the housing needs that are happening, and right now it's evictions. We don't see foreclosures for various reasons in the same way. So again, we're receiving currently about 7 to 10 calls a day. Our role is to help the people who call. We're helping them with all the preparation before they go to court, specifically accessing the resources to pay rent, and explaining how they can use the COVID protections to help them avoid eviction. So in terms of helping them with the rent assistance, we will, help them go through use the portal to apply for the rent assistance. We also have been explaining notices from landlords. One concern that we see is that many of the tenants don't understand even the very initial notice from their landlord. Landlords are sending 30-day notices to vacate, which is the first step before they can file a action in court. And these notices are really confusing. They're in English, first of all, so most of the clients we work with speak Spanish and have limited English ability. And so these notices from landlords are basically saying you have 30 days to pay. This is a 30-day notice to vacate, and this is how much money you owe, and you have to pay it by X date. So, tenants are reading that as I have 30 days and then I have to get out. So we're working on explaining that this is the first step in a process. And then, there will be an action that has to happen in court. Here's how you prepare for that. We work with them on gathering whatever documentation they may need under both the governor's order as well as the CDC's order. We explained to them, as Frank was, I think, going through the declaration, the CDC declaration that they would need to give to their landlord and what that means, penalty of perjury. They have to make sure that those statements are true before they sign and give to their landlords. Again, we encourage them to go to the court hearing. So that's sort of the work we've been doing on the direct services to tenants. And the other piece,
keep going.
The other piece that we're doing is the outreach. So we started holding weekly webinars in English and Spanish, reaching out to tenants in whatever way possible through connections with the municipalities in Montgomery County. And the municipalities are then pushing our information out to get people to attend our webinars, social media. We go to food distribution sites and hand out flyers. It's a tough time to reach tenants. And what I would just like to say is a couple things that in terms of the outreach, we'd really like to see greater cooperation from property managers and landlords. That's going to be essential. And, we'd like to be a part of that process of helping property managers and landlords understand that they should refer their renters to us, to the nonprofit providers, because we will help them access rent assistance. And without sort of someone maybe working with a renter, they're not going to know about it, and they may not have the ability to actually apply for the assistance.
Great. I think you're absolutely right. We need to have the property owners at the table with the county and the tenant organizations. I think that could be part of pulling this together to kind of step up the work that we're doing. Thank you, first of all, for your work. Really pleased the county's partnering with you. Again, our partnership with you is the result of wanting to take a different approach with the solicitation last year. Compliments to DHCA for bringing in this array of organizations. I think you did a terrific job on that resolicitation. And, I'm really pleased that we're getting this positive report from you today, Ms. Hunter. We'll move through the organizations here and then talk about how we can work together as a group more. Thank you. All right. Who's next?
Matt Losak with Renters Alliance.
Good morning, everyone. I'm not going to repeat all that we're doing because Mary seemed to cover pretty much our program as well. I will emphasize that we've been doing door-to-door literature distribution to probably about 10,000 apartments in the last 6 months. And we've also been holding a series of renter town halls, which you've all been invited to and are welcome to participate in the future. We continue to be very concerned about an emphasis in this overall program on the emergency room part of the program, which is when you end up in court. As a former Peace Corps volunteer, and for that matter, somebody who worked through college full-time in Yale New Haven Hospital emergency room, I can tell you the worst place to be in a public health scenario is in the emergency room. Once you get to the emergency room, you already have a crisis. From the Renters Alliance standpoint, we believe that early, direct, personal education early in this process can help a tenant avoid many of these crisis situations. As Frank Vitale said, they really don't want somebody to come to court having not been prepared, and if at all possible, they want to avoid going to court altogether. There are going to be tenants who need to avail themselves of these subsidies in order to delay eviction but if they do not return to work, eviction is going to be inevitable. And so how do we counsel these people so that they can look at alternatives before they get into the eviction pipeline? How do we educate them about their rights and responsibilities early before they get into a housing crisis? This is something we warned about over a year ago when we proposed funds to increase our capacity, and we're delighted that all of these partners are involved, but the overall pool needs to be increased so that all of the partners, including the Renters Alliance, are funded substantially to do this early, direct, personal outreach and education. Something that Mary said before, which I think is extremely important, and we proposed it in our original proposal a couple of years ago, that there needs to be some kind of training, and we would ask for certification as a requirement of licensing for property managers and landlords. We see many, many problems with property managers and landlords who have no idea what the law is, do not know how to avail themselves of existing resources, and are creating problems that now are, of course, exponential because of the pandemic, that we could have addressed had they understood the basics of the law, and for that matter, best practices. Oftentimes we have property managers who dig their heels in and say no, when actually a better solution would be to communicate with their tenants and work through certain types of problems. So as Mary said, we had a number of our properties who refused to allow the Renters Alliance to utilize their internal listservs to alert tenants to tenant town halls. They said, we'll do it ourselves. We don't want to work with anybody else. And we don't have to. Fortunately, we worked with Frank and with HHS to figure out when it would be appropriate for our staff and our volunteers to enter back into properties to do door-to-door literature distribution. And when HHS was comfortable that this would not, if we were masked up, we would not be spreading any virus, we went back to doing door-to-door, and we've been doing that intensely since the beginning of August. But it would have been helpful if there were some greater education by the property managers to immediately say, of course, and want to work with these partners, with us and with others, to alert tenants to available resources to avoid eviction. So we'd like to see the council consider, if you have to get a license to drive a car, you ought to be licensed to manage a multi-property apartment complex of 200 to 1,000 families, and to understand what the laws are in terms of managing those properties and best practices. So again, early, direct, personal outreach is extremely important. I would like to also to alert the council, and I'm sorry, Councilmember Hucker has left, but we are seeing a good deal of end around to these moratorium, and including, it was talked about THO as one process of an end around. That is, instead of going to failure to pay rent court, we'll simply not renew your lease. And there is no defense to that in tenant holding over court, because the landlord doesn't have to explain why they're issuing a tenant holding over or filing for eviction for tenant holding over. They only have to show that they gave 60 days notice. We're also seeing the non-recordable destabilization that comes from landlords who issue notices to vacate and other threatening tactics. So you'll receive a notice to vacate that says you need to be out in 30 days, or you need to be out in 7 days, or you need to be out in 60 days or else. Many, many tenants do not understand their rights. They believe that that notice to vacate is in fact has the force of law, and it does not. The case that Frank Vitale mentioned in Jacobo Park was a case that we referred to them of a gentleman, a mentally disabled gentleman who was living in his apartment for multiple years, whose landlord changed the locks and pushed him out. And unfortunately, the Tacoma Park Police Department, when called, did not enforce the fact that that was a criminal act. So we have a problem that we need to make sure that the police departments are again educated as to what is the law here with regard to self-help eviction. It is illegal. It's like breaking and entering. Unless a court has ordered an eviction, A landlord cannot come into your apartment and take your things and put it on the street. He or she cannot lock you out of your home. And yet a lot of people do not know this. So there's a lot to talk about here, but Renters Alliance and our partners need funding to do this direct, personal, early outreach to avoid the eviction pipeline. Extremely important. To not spend this money is to incur greater costs, far greater costs down the road. Not just humanitarian costs, but economic costs. Kids who can't achieve in school, the possibility of virus spread and what that means economically, and so on. The whole host of costs by not investing in these early direct outreach programs and education programs.
Thank you.
And the other is, of course, to make sure that we are educating property managers, landlords, and our police departments about what these laws are, so that we're not seeing the kind of destabilization that is growing at this time.
Thank you. Linda, go ahead.
I just wanted to say before we move on to CASA, obviously tenants need to have enough awareness to call DHCA if a landlord gives them a notice to vacate. But I do know that if DHCA gets the word that a tenant has just gotten a notice to vacate and the landlord says that we're going to change your locks, that they will follow up ASAP and work with folks to make sure the tenant understands what their rights are in a proper eviction proceeding.
Good point. Thank you. Yeah, if that happens, the county will be there to intervene. All right, very good. Let's continue. Anna, I know there's been moments during the session when you might have commented in a helpful way, but you've held your comments, so thank you for being here.
Yes, of course. So my name is Ana Martinez. I'm with CASA. We definitely have different organizers that are on the ground. One that focuses on the Germantown, Gaithersburg, Rockville area. Another one, the Aspen Hill, Glenmont, Wheaton area. And then the area for the Silver Spring that's the third person. So our main focus is making sure that tenants know the information, that can grasp it, especially because a lot of things are very complicated. And the reality is that there's sometimes the written messages that are provided by landlords, but sometimes tenants are receiving threats verbally, so they don't match, so there's a little bit less proof. So it's like making sure that tenants understand that even though they're receiving verbal threats that they're going to change their locks or things like that, to hold their grounds, to know their rights. And the reality is that this has been really stressful for tenants when they have so much things happening all at once. And sometimes when you're feel that pressure, you don't react properly. So we're making sure that people know their rights, that they're knowing their neighbors, because one part of being, because we want to make sure that tenants know their rights, but also pass it on to others, and they work together with others. So for example, we have different tenant associations that work on particular committees, and we have, in the Aspen Hill area, we have a lot of different complexes that have been working together. So one way that we've been, with this pandemic, it's been very complicated because there's been so many different needs all at once. So we've been making sure that we connect them to our health teams regarding COVID cases and where to get testing. We had at the beginning food distribution, while the people that were needing food distribution are most likely the folks that also needed rental assistance. So it's been a situation of how to connect to folks to so many different resources at the same time, including ERP. We also created a solidarity fund, which is donations that are brought in different forms that are go directly to tenants. So we've been trying to work with different ways to get funding, resources to folks at the same time, making sure that they can advocate themselves. We had, for example, we had a complex in the Flower Branch, not the Flower Branch, well, that one as well, but near the Long Branch area, that we're able to negotiate really early on 10% discounts on all of the different, 10% discounts on the other payments, that they were able to negotiate the no late fees and no 0% rent increase, which is something that definitely, this is something that we need to pass it at all levels, especially because we have so many tenants that their late fees are starting to accumulate. We're not talking about 1 month, we're talking about now 6 months of accumulated late fees that are on top of everything that is going on. And for sure, when it comes to holdover cases, that's definitely a practice that we're seeing a lot more often than usual. And it's unfair. It's someone that there's people that have been paying their rent, and out of nowhere they tell them that it's time for you to move, that we're not going to be renewing your lease. And that's actually a situation that we had at Quebec Terrace, where the landlord basically on July 1st provided them a 30-day notice for an entire building to leave, which was going to affect about 10 to 12 families. And there were actually folks that mostly were paying their rent. So that's something that we've been working very closely with DHCA to extend and to make it very clear that they did not follow the proper protocols when it comes to the legal aspect. But that's something that we were able to extend a few months, but it's still there, where landlords are trying to engage in bad practices of ways of pushing people over. So it's a mixture. The Long Branch, as we know, is preparing for the Purple Line. So there's a mixture of gentrification compared to everything that's going on at the same time. So, but yeah, that is what we've been working on, is making sure that we are connected with the community, that they advocate. We've had members that have been able to testify on various resources that are needed at the council, and that they learn how to advocate for themselves and united with other members, because that's what creates power.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that report. And I know Councilmember Juano has a question. Did you want to just wait for the final presentation from LEDC, or do you feel it? Okay, probably be best. Great. Let's welcome Walda Yon.
Yes, good morning. My name is Walda Yon, Chief Housing Programs with the Latino Economic Development Center, or LEDC. Historically, LEDC has provided housing counseling services to Montgomery County residents, and small business development and lending support, and also to Montgomery County residents. With this, as a result of this pandemic, we've been able to work with DHCA and the other CBOs in the meeting to respond to the needs of our community during these difficult times. So we've been working with, as the other CBOs mentioned, we've been working in our outreach strategies, our outreach efforts to reach the difficult communities, to provide the information about the efforts that the Montgomery County government is doing to support them with programs and education in their rights. So as the other CBOs, we've been increasing our outreach in sending information to them by regular mail, doing mass texts. We've been using a lot of texting, because we had identified that is one of the tools that our community use mainly during this time. We also been posting in our social media platforms, and LEDC also has a 30 minutes radio show at Radio America every week. So we've been talking about the rights, about the programs. And also we are working right now in increasing our education efforts through webinars in Spanish and in English with the coordination of DHCA and the other CBOs. We, as all of us know, that it's really difficult for our communities to participate in these programs because they have the barrier of the technology and also the knowledge of how to complete all these applications, how to provide documentation. But we are really supporting them to understand the process and making them available Zoom sessions to meet with the counselors or over the phone to complete the applications. So, yep, I don't have that much to add to what the other CBOs have already explained. All of are working together in this. As they mentioned, we meet weekly to coordinate our efforts and to increase our knowledge in the processes to support the community.
Terrific. Well, I'm so glad you're working with us on this. And I think the importance of doing this in a culturally competent way is just, it cannot be understated. And I imagine, that all the organizations are having to figure out how to tap informal networks and personal context, and just it's deep organizing in a very challenging context. And so you have to have the right people able to make those introductions and to gain access. So I'm really pleased with this program, and I'm glad you're working on it in CASA and Housing Initiative Partnership as well. So terrific. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you. And thank you to everybody for all your work. I know this is a difficult time, and you're on the front lines helping some of our most vulnerable. So thank you very much for what you're doing. And thank you also to Ms. McMillan for, as always, a great preparation packet here. A couple of issues were raised, and anyone who wants to address it from the group can. I know, Anna, I would like you to, in particular, I'll go backwards here. One of the things that's clear is you all need, there's more outreach that needs to be done. Whether you start with the DHCA numbers, one, we know there's unmet need. Two, we have to get the money out quickly, but that's connected to the need to get the information to people so they know their rights, number one, but also know how to get access to the money that is available. So these are all that you have this chicken and egg all connected, and then we obviously want them to know their legal rights, but that's a last resort because, again, as Mr. Vitale said, there's not much you can do in many of these cases going forward. And then we have a set of legal issues that were raised around these presumptive judgments, which I'm going to definitely want to dig into with my colleagues. But so clear to me, everyone, we need more money for outreach so that we can get to the doors and get to people. That I support that fully. I look forward to working with my colleagues to supporting that and getting that to you. And then also the issue about property managers and their training, knowledge, and awareness. I'd like to give people the benefit of the doubt. We want to make sure they know what they're doing so that they're not doing something that would be against the law or would be unfair to their tenants. But we also want to make sure that when we do have people that violate the law or what's required, that we know about it and that there are consequences for it. So I heard the idea from Mr. Losak about a training course for certain sized properties. I think that makes sense. But I did want to ask the question about fees. It was unfathomable to me that when I put forward the bill to freeze rents at 0% increases, rather, not freeze rents, but rent increases, halt rent increases during COVID, that we couldn't pass the amendment to also restrict late fees from accruing. And, it's really troubling now, here we are months later, to hear from you, Ms. Martinez, that these late fees continue to accrue and are being added on top of the rent. So I wanted, if you could start, but if there's others, is this a common thing that you're seeing? Are we seeing the accrual of late fees being added on and used as justification for evictions?
I mean, definitely they're accruing on. We have members, they've been able to pay a portion, but now it's still there. So for sure, this is something that I feel like it's something very small that could be fixed, right? Because people, it's just an addition to everything that they already owe.
Councilmember Jawando, not only are we seeing the late fees accrue, but we're still seeing property managers issuing rent increase notices that exceed 2.6%, and are still unaware that this law applies to them, that anything after April 24th must be 2.6 or less. Just yesterday, we got a complaint from a tenant who has a 3.5% rent increase because he is month to month, and yet that should be 2.6% or less. And so, again, thank you for your emphasis on the importance of outreach and education, and hopefully your support and other members' support of educating property managers and landlords about these laws. So much of these problems can be prevented well in advance with greater education and awareness.
Appreciate that.
I'll also add that we're seeing late fees as well. It's just unfortunate that the landlords were tacking those on during COVID, especially the 4 or 5 months after March. And I think that this idea of best practices for property managers is a great approach. I wish there was more we can do than just best practices, but I think this 30-day notice to vacate is a real concern. If we could do some education around that and ensure that the landlords put something in that notice that says contact 311 to find out what your resources are at that moment, or contact a nonprofit provider. Or just contact a nonprofit provider that can help you access resources at that time.
Unless they're renting a room, they should get more than a 30-day notice anyway.
That's already required, Ms. McCray.
Yeah, if they're in a multifamily, they have to get 60 days, unless it's a breach of lease notice.
The notices that we've seen that have come through HHS have typically been if you don't pay your full balance within 30 days or filing for an eviction, but it's not written in as plain language as I'm stating it. So it makes you think, if I can't pay this in 30 days, I must have to leave. And it's not clear the process of, if you don't pay, then I'm going to file. Then there's going to be a court date potentially assigned, and we're going to have to work through this during that process.
And it's designed that way.
Yeah.
For intimidation purposes.
Exactly.
And when people tell us, we call. We tell them you can't put that notice in. You have to put in a notice that says your rent is late, and if you don't catch up, we're going to start eviction proceedings. You can say that because that's true. All the rest of them are designed for intimidation purposes. And we will call the landlord, but a lot of times people just don't tell us. And if we don't know, we can't do anything.
No,
it's the same thing with everybody else. It's an education issue.
Now imagine if we had a program of certifying property managers and landlords that said you're supposed to know the basics of the law and you can't do these kinds of things, and if you do, you could lose your license. Maybe we would stem some of this.
So let me ask you a question, Ms. McCray. Would a template help? Is there like a DHCA template of, here's when someone has for failure to pay rent, this is what you have to send, and it must look exactly like this and say this. Is that, and then you still have the education component that's required, but yeah, go ahead.
It's in the handbook, but Matt and I had discussed this prior to COVID-19, putting together a program to, and it was probably going to end up being online because of staff restrictions, but putting together a program to make sure that everybody was certified, because there are a lot of things that are in the handbook and that people don't know about. They don't know. Right. They don't take the time to find out.
All right. Well, that's something I think, as I said from the beginning, we should revisit. It seems like there's unanimous agreement that would be helpful, not only to the tenants, but to landlords to know what their responsibilities are. So we'll explore that as well. Okay. I appreciate it. I'll pause for now. I hope to try to revisit the late fees issue. I just think it's unconscionable that we would allow that to happen and just allow the rent to be stacked up on people like that. So thank you for all your work, and I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
If I can just to let you know anecdotally with the late fees, because for our funds we are seeing the rent ledgers, there are some, and I can try to go back through and find, who have really stepped up and have not charged late fees during this whole period. And so I know, it's the conversations with them, right? Some of it has been when we have had the opportunity to have more direct conversations with the landlords before we release the funds and saying, hey, we're about to give you $4,000. Do you think you can knock off this couple hundred, sometimes up to 1,000 now at this point, of late fees? I have found many of them to be amendable to some of those conversations, especially when we are putting a large chunk of money on the table. And I think that's where some of the partnership between what HHS is, what our program can do now, because, as we've talked about, we are under a lot of pressure to just get the money out, and the role that some of our partners on the call or on the session now can be playing in terms of helping to have those negotiations and helping our tenants to understand that they can have those negotiations too, right? Just because someone puts a charge on your rent ledger doesn't mean that charge has to stay there. And how are you getting involved with having that conversation with your landlord to come up with a payment plan that hopefully releases some of your responsibility too?
Well, I appreciate that, Ms. Branda, but that's really a testament to your innovative public service and leveraging county dollars in a way that shouldn't need to be leveraged for something that shouldn't be assessed at this time anyway. But I appreciate you for being a smart public servant and working with folks, and I agree with you, but I just don't think that they should have the ability to even levy those charges. But I would like to see the information, and I'm glad HHS is doing that in that way, because that makes sense under the current, what we have under current law. Thank you.
And Councilor Javando, we are planning to have a webinar just for the landlords. We are planning this webinar in consultation with AOVA, so we can tell the landlords what their responsibilities are towards their tenants, what their tenants' rights are, and that will also give them the opportunity to ask any questions.
If I could just add, we've done the landlord information sessions before, working with Ulta, and they are always helpful, to be sure. But oftentimes there's an emphasis put on small landlords because they don't understand the basic laws of how to manage a small property, and with the idea that the larger corporate landlords are more informed because they have larger staffs and attorneys and so on. But what is missing in that analysis is that the property managers that work for these large corporations are often revolving staff and are just not informed about the basics of the law. So the larger property managers should not be neglected in the overall need to educate property managers and landlords about rights and responsibilities. And as Councilmember Jawando just said, we hope this doesn't become anecdotal but systemic.
All right. Linda, is there any remaining part of the agenda for today?
I don't think so. I think we have quite a few things to follow up on, and I'm sure we'll be returning to the issue.
All right, very good. It was a very helpful update. I'm particularly interested to follow up additionally on the outreach and how all the groups are working together, and with Maryland Legal Aid as well, and then also talking to the property owners. I think especially some of the larger ones, there might be ways that we could really smooth out some of this outreach and help the tenants learn more about what their rights are well before they're arriving at the court and encountering the legal aid team. So I think that's an important goal for us. All right, good. Well, thank you for everyone's work. Terrific updates and good discussion today. And absent any concluding comments, we will resume this conversation in the future. All right.
Everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
That had been previously had buying it wholesale. So then when the restaurants were allowed